Hi, everybody. Welcome back to dinanddaf. I'm Elana Stein Hain, and we are going to study a concept, a halacha concept on the basis of the daf. So this concept actually comes up in last week's daf and this week's daf, and that is the concept of Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. Now, people often talk about acting Lifnim Mishurat Hadin as going above and beyond the letter of the law, right? Telling somebody to keep the change, even though they should probably give you the change that you're owed. Now, the truth is that that is a misnomer because Lifnim means within. Shurat Hadin means the line of the law. So instead of thinking about it as going above and beyond something, I actually want to change the spatial metaphor for us before we even talk about what we're going to do with Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. And I'm going to change the spatial metaphor the way that Dr. Christina Hayes, who is a noted Talmudist in America in the academy, has suggested to me, and it makes perfect sense, which is the line of the law. If you go all the way up to it, you are taking all of your rights. But staying Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, within the line of the law, meaning not going all the way up to the line, not taking everything that is due you, that is essentially, it is true, you're doing more than you're supposed to, but the spatial metaphor is you're giving something up, right? By going Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, you're giving up a right that you had to go all the way up to a certain line, to go all the way to expect certain things. And you're saying, you know what? I'm going to give up some of those rights. I'm going to step back a little bit. And that's the spatial metaphor. By the way, this metaphor also helps you understand the term avera, literally going over that line, right? You don't want to transgress that line. You want to go up to that line or before that line. You never want to go over it. But either way, the concept of Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, staying within the line of the law, meaning giving something up. Question we're going to ask about it today is, having a concept that is a legal concept about doing more than what the law requires of you. Wait, so is that part of the law, or is that something that you get to just decide to do yourself? Right? Because on the one hand, it's a legal concept. So it sounds like it's part of the law itself. But on the other hand, the whole point of it is that it's not actually what the law requires. The law requires something, and you're doing something else that maybe is not required of you. So it's a very strange concept and a very amazing concept. And I think also tells you something about how aspirational halakha wants to be and tries to push people to be. And so I want to talk about that question. Is acting Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, which I'm going to call within the line of the law, you might want to call beyond, above and beyond, but is acting Lifnim Mishurat Hadin something that is part of din itself, part of the law itself, or is it something that is your discretion? You can decide to do it, right? So the nafkamina essentially would be, and I kind of indicated it by saying discretion as the other option. The nafkamina would be, can people be compelled to act Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, right? Or is it purely discretionary and people have to decide it on their own? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to look at 3 examples of Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. Only 2 of them use the term Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, but the third is widely categorized as a case of Lifnim Mishurat Hadin as well. And we're going to ask ourselves, does it seem like this is something that can be coerced, or does it seem like this is something that a person has to decide on their own? And I think that there are hashlachot, there are ramifications in either direction. Okay? So let's take a look at these 3 examples. I am going to share my screen just as soon as I can find it. Okay. Here we go. So the first example we're going to look at is from last week's daf, Bava Metsia Kaf Dalid Amud Bet, and it goes as follows. Rav Yehuda hava shakil v'azo b'atrei demar Shmuel b'shukka daisa. So Rav Yehuda is following his teacher around in a marketplace where they sell, pounded grain. Amrle matzakan arniki mahu. And so he asks his teacher, if a person found a purse here, what, and mahu just means, what is it, right? Now, is he saying, what should the person do? What must the person do? Doesn't specify a verb, right? Just mahu, what? Amrle, so Shmuel answers him, Hare'elu shalom. If you find that purse in this public market, finders keepers. Why? Because we assume that the person who lost it had Yeush. They despaired of ever getting it again. I mean, this is a huge public marketplace, a gazillion people. They're not going to find it. Okay, so Rav Yehuda continues his questioning. He says, okay, but what if Ba'Yisrael v'natan basiman mahu? What if a Jew came and was able to tell you what a distinguishing feature of this object was, meaning they were able to give you evidence that it belonged to them. So then, mahu, what, right? Or what is it? Meaning, what should you do? Amar le, so Shmuel says to him, chayav lahachzin. Okay? You have to then return it. Okay? First of all, he uses the word chayav. You have to. But wait a second. Tarti, could both of these be true? You just told me that because it was in a public thoroughfare, the one who lost it had Yeush, and therefore finders keepers. But now you're telling me that if that person comes and gives a siman that it's theirs, you have to give it back. How could these both be true? Amrlai, so he answers, Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. That is going within the line of the law, meaning you're giving up some rights as the finder. The right as the finder is that it should be yours because the one who lost it probably had Yeush, and you're giving up some of those rights and giving it back to them. Now, is that required? Well, it sounds like he said the word chayav, but on the other hand, then why call it Lifnim Mishurat Hadin within the line of law? And then he gives another example, Ki hadavu ad Shmuel, like the example of Shmuel's father, Ashkach hana chamer bamidbara. He found some chamorim, he found some donkeys in the midbar, the wilderness, v'hadrinu l'maraihu levater tresar yarchei, and he gave them back after 12 months to the person who had lost them, which presumably after 12 months should be finders keepers because there's been Yeush. That was Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, right? So on the one hand, he says Chayav lahasir, and on the other hand, it's called Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. And then the Gemara continues by having a parallel example of another person walking and asking a question of their Rebbe in the market about Hashavat Aveda, about returning a lost object. Very similar question. So Rava was walking, following Rav Nachman in the shuk of tanners, the tanners market. Some people think it was the sages market, which I'm not sure what that really means, but the sages market. Amrleini asks, similar to what we heard before from Rav Yehuda to Shmuel, Matzakan Arniki Mahu. What should you do? What is the case? What is the ruling if you find a purse here? Amrlei Hare Elu Shalom. No problem. Finders keepers. Again, probably Yesh, very busy market. What about Ba'Yisrael v'natan basiman? What if a Jew comes and can offer a distinguishing mark on the object? Then Mahu, what's the situation? Meaning, what should you do? Amarle, so he says, Hare Elu Shalom. What do you mean? I just told you. Finders keepers. It's post Yeush. So then the question comes back to Rav Nachman. V'halo umeid v'tzoveach? Isn't this person, standing there and screaming that it's theirs, right? And it's not clear if this was actually said to Rav Nachman or if this is, an editorial comment, but it's kind of wait a second. The person is standing in front of you. You're going to turn to them and say, sorry, you already have Yesh, even though you know it belongs to them. It's like they're standing there and screaming about it. So the Gemara says, no. It's like somebody who's screaming about their house that fell or about their boat that capsized, that drowned at sea. So what's done is done. Yeush actually means that you don't have hope of getting back the object. So now you're screaming, oh, my house, my house. It's already fallen. It's too late, right? So let's go back to this question. In the first scenario, Shmuel says, you know what? If a person comes and shows a distinguishing mark, even though it's after Yeush, chayav lachazir, you have to give it back. Why Lifnim Mishurat Hadin? We're staying within the line of the law. We're not going to claim all of the rights that the law would have given us to keep it. Then Rava, same situation, asks Rav Nachman, same question. Rav Nachman says, no, of course you don't have to return it, right? In fact, finders keepers. So are they having a machloket about what the law is? Or would you say that even Shmuel would say, nah, the line of the law, the letter of the law is that finders keepers, it's after Yeosh, even if the person comes and shows a distinguishing mark. But it's only if you decide that you're going to be nice, if you decide that you're not going to take the rights of finders keepers, that you give it. Or is there a real machloket here about Mishurat Hadin? Okay, so that's the first example. Second example, this week's daf. Bava Metsia, Lamed Amud Bet. This is a great example because it's kind of like comical what happens. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi have a ka'aza ba'orcha. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi is walking on the street, on the way. Paga be'ahu gavra habadare pitcha de'ofe otvenu v'kamitva. So a guy is carrying a lot of sticks, and he sits down to rest. And then Amarle Dalili, and he turns to Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, says, "Can you help me? Can you put these on my back?" Right? He's asking for help. And here, this is not a Shabbat Avita. This is like Prika and Te'ina. This is asking somebody to help you carry and to help you load your stuff. So Amarle, so Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi says to him, Kama Shavin, how much do they cost? Amarle, he responds, Palga Dezuza, it's a half a zuz. So Yavle Palga Dezuza. So what did Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi do? Instead of helping him pick the stuff up, he says, you know what? I'll give you what they're worth. And Va'afkaran, he makes the twigs or the sticks hefker. Says anybody can come take them. And you, guy, I just gave you money. And you don't have to carry the sticks home. You'll go home, you'll buy more sticks, right? So he thinks Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi thinks he's doing this guy a favor, right? Now, this guy doesn't seem to think it's a favor because Hadar Zachabahu, he goes back and he picks up, he goes over to the twigs and says, these are mine. He takes them out of Hefker. So Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi is like, wait, what? Hadar Yarvle Palgad Zuzah. He gives him another half a zuz. Like, no, I'm like giving you the amount of this so that you don't have to carry your twigs home. You now have the amount. You can buy more twigs when you get home or wherever you go. So like, just take the money, But Afkari makes it hefker again. He's like, I don't need these twigs. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi is doing this out of the goodness of his heart, And then, fool me once, shame on me, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Well, here it's fool me once, shame on you, shame on. Let's try that again. Here it's fool me once, shame on me. Nope. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on you. And now it's fool me 3 times, shame on me. Because look at what happens. He sees that the guy is coming back to try to get the sticks a 3rd time. Amarle, and he says, no. It's hefker for everybody else. It's not hefker for you. You can't take it, right? So the Gemara then asks, like, what do you mean? Can you do such a thing that you make it hefker for one person, for these people and not for those people? And then Gemara concludes, okay, he was just trying to sort of push him off. But the point is, what seems to happen here is this guy asks for help loading. Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi isn't going to give him help to load, but instead he's giving him money. And so the Gemara says, why was he doing that? Right? So why did Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi even engage this guy? He actually is older, and maybe also because he's a sage, and it's actually not his kavod to help this guy put his twigs on his back. Like, I wouldn't ask my grandmother to help me, load my car, right? Like, there's no requirement halachically. It's not just, not a nice thing for me to ask my grandmother to help load my car. It's actually, my grandmother would be allowed to say no, right? So like even the mitzvah of pre-cantina, even the mitzvah of helping somebody load something, if you're a zaken, or zakena, right? You're older, you're sort of person of stature in that regard. And it's not dignified for you to do that. You're totally putter to Ra from helping them, right? So Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi, why did he even try to help this guy, right? He was putter from helping him, right? Well, Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi Lifnim Mishurat Hadin Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi was doing Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, right? So it makes it sound like it's not something he has to do. It's something he chooses to do discretionarily. What I think is so interesting is he chooses to do it and it's a total bust, right? It's like he gets taken advantage of. That's first of all. And second of all, the guy is like, that's not the help I wanted, right? So it kind of introduces that in a situation where it's not necessarily so clear what's required, sometimes that introduces a kind of what's the word? A kind of spontaneity that can lead to unexpected consequences. Like, oh, well, the rule doesn't exactly tell me what to do, meaning like by the rule, I'm totally putter, but I'm deciding in my own discretion that I'm going to try to help you. So I'm going to try to help you the way I think you should be helped. Doesn't mean you want to be helped that way, right? Or better yet, the rule says that I'm exempt and I'm the one who's choosing to give you extra money. By law, nobody says you can't go pick up the sticks again, right? Like there's no transparent like way to go here, right? It's all about the choices that people are making. And the fact that it's all about the choices that people are making, it means it's unpredictable and it can actually lead to pretty negative consequences, which is what law tries not to do, right? Like law tries to be predictable. But then it's so interesting because you have this example of somebody who's acting Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, which is clearly discretionary behavior on his part. He didn't have to help this guy at all. And it led to like a total ridiculous outcome. It didn't go well, right? And the Gemara quotes where we get the idea from Lifnim Mishurat Hadin from, but even more interesting is that later on the Amud, Rabbi Yochanan says, Lo chava Yerushalayim ela al shedanu ba din Torah. So Rabbi Yochanan says Yerushalayim is only destroyed because they, judged based on Torah law. So the Gemara says, what do you mean? Ela dina de megiz teladainu. What do you want them to judge based on arbitrary decision making? Ela ema, say that what he means is she'amidu dineim al din Torah. They followed the strict line of the law, I would say. Velo avdu lifnim mishurat hadin, and they didn't do within the line of the law, meaning nobody gave up the rights that they, had by law. Everybody claimed all the rights that they had. Nobody's willing to give anything up. And it's interesting, first of all, this comment coming after this, snafu example where Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi tried to do Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, and it was a disaster, right? It's so interesting that the Gemara would then say, and by the way, make sure you keep doing Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. It's almost like the Gemara is saying, despite the foibles of it, you should do it. Or maybe the Gemara is saying, oh my gosh, if you live in a society where all every case of Lifnim Mishurat Hadin is going to be a case where somebody's not really paying attention to what the other person needs and the other person is exploiting the person who's trying to help them, then like that's a messed up society. Like that's Lifnim Mishurat Hadin is not going to work. Maybe there's things that we need to do better, right? Don't turn people into friars. Don't exploit their goodness. And also try to find out how people actually need help, right? But either way, it's really interesting that this follows up because it's basically saying, nope, you got to do Lifnim Mishurat Hadin anyway, but maybe you want to watch out for some of these pitfalls that happen when people are using discretion, right? But the other thing is, it kind of makes it sound like, and it's not so clear, what do you mean, Torah? Does that mean people behaved in a non-Lifnim Mishurat Hadin way, or does it mean judges didn't incorporate the Lifnim Mishurat Hadin? Because those are two different things, right? If a judge incorporates the Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, that sounds like they can force a person, they can force a litigant to act Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, right? But if we're talking about just people not behaving Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, then maybe we're saying we want people to use their discretion to behave Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, but they're not, and that's upsetting because they're just going with like what we would call the ethical floor, right? Like the lowest common denominator of ethics, and they're not being aspirational in their ethics, right? But it's not really clear, right? So again, we have this question of like, are we talking about Lifnim Mishurat Hadin? It can be forced, or Lifnim Mishurat Hadin is purely discretionary, right? So if it can be forced, it's really interesting because it's a little bit like, so why is it called Lifnim Mishurat Hadin? And if it's discretionary, watch out for some of the pitfalls of discretionary decision making, like not helping a person the way that they want to be helped, or like getting taken advantage of because you decided to put yourself out there in a way that was unexpected and was also maybe uninvited, right? The third example is also pretty, unclear, right? And that's Bava Metsia Pegei Melamed Aleph, which Bezrat Hashem you'll get to when you get to. And it goes like this. It doesn't say Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, but it seems to be a clear example of Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. Rabba bar Rav Chanan, Tavru lehanu shakulai chavita decham. So Rabba bar Rav Chan, bar Chanan, he employed porters, and they broke a barrel of his wine. So, well, compensation, please. So Shakal Liglimayu, he took their clothes as, presumably as collateral for them to pay. Atu Amr Rav, they went and told Rav, Amr Le, Avlahu Limayu. Rav went to Rabba bar Chanan and says, give them back their clothes. Amr Le, and Rabba says, what? Dina Hachi? Is that the law? Like, what do you mean? These are porters. They were supposed to do a job for me. They broke my stuff. They owe me money. Is this the din? And Rav says to him, Amrullah, he says, yes. I'm not sure every manuscript has the word yes, but Laman telech b'derech tovim. In order that you should walk in the ways of the good people, from Mishlei. That's his halachic proof. So Rav says, you should return their clothes to them. You have to return their clothes to them so that you walk in the ways of those who are good. So it's required, or it's just having good virtue, right? Like, so on the one hand, it's Dina Hachi, is this the law? And on the other hand, he's quoting Mishlei. Mishlei is not like a halachic source, the way that you would quote other halachic sources, right? So Yavlu Glimayu, he gave them their clothes back. Okay? Amrulay, and then the porter said, Aniyeh Anan, we're poor. V'tarchin kulayoma v'kafin, and we've worked all day and we are hungry. V'leit lan midi, and we don't have anything. Meaning, aren't you going to pay us? It's like, can you imagine? This is really a bad precedent. You come into your house to do work, they break your stuff. They're like, okay, you have to pay us, and also we're not going to pay you for what we did wrong. We're not going to pay you for what we broke, right? So, you know what? Amalei Zilhav, Rav says to Rabbi Bar Chanan, sorry, you got to pay them. Right? It is Zilhav Agrahi, sorry. You have to pay them their wages. Amalei Dina Hachi says, is that the rule? Is that the din? Is that the law? Amalei, and he says, yes, or maybe in some manuscripts he doesn't say that, but he does say, Varchot Tzadikim Tishmor, the next pasuk in Mishlei. Keep the path of the righteous. Okay, is that like Halakha? Is that like required? Right? Still not clear. Yes, I understand if you want to be virtuous. So you choose to be virtuous. Now, this is also interesting because it's like, this really is a bad precedent to set. You're going to have people who come in, are supposed to do a job, do a bad job, break things, don't have to pay for what they broke. And you still have to pay them for their job? Like, right? So is that something that you can't really force a person to do? It's only if the Baal Habayit or Baalat Habayit is feeling magnanimous, right? Like they're feeling generous. But here it makes it sound like maybe you have to, or maybe because he's quoting Mishlei, everybody knows you don't have to, but it's the right thing to do, something like that. So all three of the examples had like, Stadim Lakan and Stadim Lakan, right? Things that indicated about them that it sounds like you're required to act Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, and things that indicated about it that you are not required to do Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, and it's a matter of discretion. And it's kind of interesting. It doesn't totally break down this way, but it happens to be that many Ashkenazic Rishonim and Achronim as well, or poskim, I should say, think that you can compel people to act Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, while many Sephardic, specifically Rishonim, think that you can't, right? So it's just interesting. So I just want to see some examples, okay? Or I want to see one example of each. So the Bach, the Bayit Chadash, Rav Yoel Circus, who, when I was a kid, when we first learned about Rav Yoel Circus in I don't know, fourth grade, fifth grade, sixth grade. I don't know, when did we first learn about the Bach? I have a good friend who was very funny, and he used to make like the so every time I read Rav Yoel Circus, I can't get that out of my head, his circus tune. So I apologize for people who that offense, but to me, it's just like a piece of deliciousness from my youth. So the Bach says, in Choshen Mishpat Yud Bet Dalid. Ita b'sofa umnin, be'ovda de Rabba bar Chana, right? He calls it Rabba bar Chana situation, not Rabba bar Chanan. Okay. So there's this case in the situation of Rabba bar Chana, which we call Rabba bar Chanan. Chavita de Chamra, they break his stuff. Shaka Leglimai, he takes their clothes. Ata Amr Le Rav, they told Rav, Amr Le Havlu Glimayu, he says, give them their clothes back. Amr Le Dinach, he says, this is the din. Amr Le Lamantelech B'derech Tovim, you have to go, this is to go in the path of the righteous. Umaiti Le Rabbeinu Lekaman Siman Shandalit, Upiresh Rashi, B'derech Tovim, Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. Right? So Rashi says, B'derech Tovim means go Lifnim Mishurat Hadin. Ad kan Lashono. Mashma, it sounds like the Rav Hava Kayefle LeRabba bar Chana. It sounds like Rav compelled Rabba bar Chana to act like mi-shurat Hadin. Tim lo kain, if not, my kamerle dina hachi. Right? What does he mean by is this the din? Im lo balakufal lekufal. If we're not talking about a situation where he can be compelled by Rav to do this. And likewise, in the case of Matzah Arniki B'Shuk, the Perak Elam Mitziot, in our Perak of finding a person in the Shuk. The Ka'amar, he says, Shmuel says, Chayav L'Hachzir, right? Mishum Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, right? You have to give it back out of Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, even though Yesh has already happened. Mashma, it sounds like Chayav L'Hachzir, excuse me, lefachot, at least, mashma chayav lachzir b'bali latzeit yidei shamayim. It sounds like you are at least required to do it if you want to fulfill the divine mandate. Okay. Now, this is very interesting because he's offering that maybe there's like a middle ground with mi-shurat. It's not that it's totally discretionary. And it's not that it's totally required by our courts, because otherwise, why would it be called Lifnim Mishurat Hadin? But maybe it's this in between, where you're chayav or chayevet, let's say, yedei shamayim, right? That if you want to reach God's requirements, it's not something that a human court is going to require of you. But God looks at it and says, I want you to do better, right? Then maybe you're chayav in order if you want to be yotzeit Yedei Shamayim, right? If you want to do that. Now, for those who remember from the beginning of dinanddaf, I think that was the first year that I gave on being Yotzei Dinei Shamayim. And I think I mentioned the mi-shurat Hadin back then, right? But this would be the something in between. And maybe it's possible that a Beit Din can force the mi-shurat Hadin. And maybe it's possible that when we say that you're chayav to do something with mi-shurat Hadin, it's not to fulfill the requirements of a human court, but it's to fulfill God's requirements. Or maybe, as Rabbeinu Hananel says, it's totally discretionary, right? So Rabbeinu Hananel just adds, a few words into the example of Rabbi Yehuda following Shmuel in the Shuk. Rabbi Yehuda Ava Azal Batre Demar Shmuel B'Shukah, the Beidaisa, is following Shmuel around in the Shuk. Armale Matzakan Arneki Mahu. If you found a purse here, what is one to do? Armalei Shalom, finders keepers. What about Ba Yisrael v'Natan Simaneha Mahu? What if a Jew comes and can tell you the distinguishing mark, proving that it belongs to them? Amarlo, you ready? He adds a few words. Im rotzeh la'asot lifnim mishurat hadin machzir. If a person wants to act lifnim mishurat hadin, then they return it, right? You notice instead of chayav lachzir, it's im rotzeh la'asot lifnim mishurat hadin, then machzir, right? So Rabbeinu Hananel is taking the side of, nah, this is discretion, right? So I want to just point out before I end that, and I mentioned this in that first year, Dr. Deborah Barrow wrote a dissertation, which I assume will become a book, on Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, on that concept in Chazal. And I think it's really, really interesting when she talks about the possibility that Lifnim Mishurat Hadin is an example of discretion-based ethics. So I want to read what she says. Rabbinic literature often presents rule-based decision-making as the primary or standard model of reasoning, what we might call mi-shurat Hadin, right? But discretionary judgment differs from rule-based decision-making in several key ways. Both types of judgment are attentive to the details of the case at hand. But while rule-based decision-making uses those details to isolate and identify the appropriate rules and precedents that provide guidance in the case, right? So rule-based decisions is asking, okay, what's the precedent? What are the rules that are supposed to be applied here, right? But discretionary judgment considers how to balance those details in order to achieve an optimal outcome for the actors involved in the case, right? Meaning using your discretion is less about process, right? Rule-based decision-making is about process. What's the process you have to follow? Discretion should be about outcome, right? Like I'm Rabbi Shmuel Rabbi Yossi. It's true. I don't have to help you, right? But if I'm thinking with discretion, I want to know what the outcome is going to be. The outcome is going to be, oh, Nebuch, you're not going to be able to get these sticks home, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to pay you, right? Now, of course, he didn't think about the outcome that could happen if the guy didn't want to leave the sticks there, but that's a different conversation. Or if that guy just wanted to extort him for money, right? So that's a major difference between rule-based, process-oriented, and outcome-based discretion. Such decision makers, meaning if you're deciding out of discretion, are still constrained by existing rules, right? While rabbis acting Lifnim Mishurat Hadin diverge from the normative expectations established by law, they never explicitly transgress rabbinic prohibitions, right? Nobody's doing any averot here, right? That's the point. Lifnim Mishurat Hadin, you stay within the line of the law, you don't transgress. Despite this awareness of legal constraints, however, their focus is not primarily on rules, but on outcomes. When exercising discretion, the decision maker does not act as an impartial judge. That person is at the center of the process and is personally impacted by the outcome of the decision. As a result, various extra legal, meaning more than just legal, factors may impact their choices, such as the relationship with the other people involved, right? Like you come up to me and you say, hey, can you help me? And I say, nah, sorry, I'm old and I don't want to help you. Like I don't have to help you, right? But maybe we have a close relationship and I want to help you, right? So there's a whole aspect of decision making here that isn't just like trying to offer a sense of objectivity, right? So let's get back to our original question. Our original question is, acting with mi-shurat hadin, what is this concept? Can it be compelled? Can it not be compelled? It seems like we have three lines on this spectrum. One point on the spectrum says, yeah, of course it can be compelled. In fact, it should have been compelled at the time of Bai Cheni. Had it been compelled more, Yerushalayim wouldn't have been destroyed, right? That's one. Another seems to be encoded in the Bach. Well, if you want to be Yotze in God's eyes, if you want to be Yotze divine standards, even if human standards won't hold you to this, then you're chayevet to do this, right? Or Rabbeinu Hananel, totally discretionary, right? But no matter how you slice it, whether we're saying it's discretionary and really Chazal are offering like a different way of thinking about, what we do. It's not just rules based, but it's the aspiration for the outcome. Or it is something that can be required. Either way, what it's really trying to say is don't just follow the ethical floor. Keep striving for more. Not everything that's coming to us is stuff that we should claim. And what does it look like when, as human beings, we are willing to give up a little bit in the name of relationships, in the name of a healthy outcome, in the name of helping somebody who is having a hard time? Thanks, everybody, for joining. Looking forward to next week.